Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. The elderly Alterian leader spoke in a hushed tone, his voice taking on a solemn tone as he uttered the forbidden name. Dominion of Xyler, he whispered, stealing a glance around the meeting room to make sure no one who wasn't supposed to be present was within earshot. They were the last species to incur the wrath of humanity, and we're not talking about them anymore. The young recruits, still in the early stages of their first molt, were impatient, like youngsters who have yet to learn which questions can be deadly. One of them dared to ask, "Why not?" Commander Zor's mandibles clicked, a sound that could convey both amusement and horror. But for Alterians it often meant both, for they no longer existed. Not their worlds, not their stations, not even their memories. When people get really angry, Commander Zor paused, remembering, they don't just defeat you, they destroy you. The story began 50 cycles ago, when the galaxy was a different place. As the Xyler Empire expanded into 20 systems, their magnificent and formidable crystal ships crisscrossed lesser civilizations. They were their own gods, flawless, cold, completely confident in their superiority. Humanity has just entered the galactic arena, still recovering from the brink of extinction. For colonies, a handful of upgraded ships, a species that apologized for its customs and smiled too much at diplomatic gatherings. The Xyler stared at them like a predator at wounded prey. They don't fight people, they survive. The first human colony they captured was called Elysium. Tecker continued, his voice taking on a solemn tone. A farming settlement. 45,000 souls, families, children, beings who have never held a weapon in their hands. Xyler broadcast the destruction of the colony on all frequencies. They called it a demonstration of what happens to species too weak to defend themselves. They forced people to watch Elysium burn, as escape pods were chased for fun. How the survivors were processed into a nutritious paste for Xyler. People asked for Ori's help, but Ori replied with a message marked, "Return to sender." The entire galaxy was waiting for Earth's response. Will they be furious? Will they beg? Will they offer tribute to save their remaining colonies? The Xyler regarded this as a sign of their superiority, but they were wrong. On the 8th day, something changed in human space, not their technology, which remained primitive by galactic standards, and not their numbers, which were still 1,000 times inferior. A profound shift has occurred in human consciousness. Predators would have recognized this shift, but civilized species have forgotten it. Their anger was not loud, but surgical. The first sign of this was the ship's logs. Tavar's tail twitched involuntarily in fear. Human vessels, cargo ships, and mining vessels have been targeted. Everything that had an engine disappeared from commercial routes. When asked, Earth simply stated that they were redistributing resources. The Xyler were laughing. What could humans do with outdated cargo ships against the most powerful military force in the galaxy? They prepared to establish a second colony to bring the lesson to an end. They never got the chance. They did not conquer. They erased the Battle of Kepler from history. That's what they call it. But it wasn't a battle. Battles have survivors. Battles have witnesses. Battles leave something behind. 300 human ships have emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Xyler Prime system. Not warships, but welding rigs, icebreakers, and asteroid miners. Ships held together by determination and manned by volunteers who wrote their children's names on their bulkheads. The Xyler fleet, 10 times their size, moved to intercept them. Their admirals were betting on how many minutes the human fleet would last. We had fleets. They had. We were armed, but they had a purpose. People didn't try to match them ship by ship, but they did something different. Something that defied every rule of civilized warfare. Every human ship was a bomb. It didn't carry a bomb, but the ship itself was a weapon. The engines were overloaded, the reactors were set to explode, and the holds were filled with industrial mining explosives. These missiles, 300 times faster than light, were aimed not at the Xylar fleet, but threw it to the worlds beyond. The Xylar released everything they had: plasma spears that could split moons, and singular weapons that could distort space itself. People kept walking, and even if you could vaporize 90% of the ship, if there was an engine core left, it would continue to accelerate. The Xylar considered themselves gods, but even gods fall when they awaken something more ancient, something buried, something human. The first breakthrough was achieved by the Memory, a former cargo ship whose crew affixed images of dead Elysians to every surface. Memory collided with Xylar Prime, 70% of the speed of light. Have you ever witnessed the demise of a planet? What is it? He asked his recruits. Not because of bombing or conquest, but because of death. Kinetic energy transformed the atmosphere into a plasma state. The bark has melted. 20 billion Xylars. The core of their empire disappeared in an instant, brighter than their sun. But the people weren't done. We warned them once. We laughed, but not for long. Every Xylar world, every station, every outpost. People came for all of them, not to occupy or conquer, but to eradicate. They called it Operation Empty Sky, because that's all they left behind. A sky devoid of worlds. The galaxy watched with growing horror as humanity systematically destroyed the Empire. No speeches, no demands, no mercy. The Xylar tried to surrender, but how can you surrender to silence? They begged for negotiations, but all they got were new ships, new strikes, a new empty sky. You may think that people are weak because they smile, but I've seen what happens when they stop smiling. The Galactic Council insisted on a truce and discussion. People sent one message: they killed our children. It will end when they run out. Some Xylar sought refuge in territories of other species. People followed them, sending non-aggressive fleets and single operatives with lists and patient eyes. The refugees disappeared one by one, without violence in the streets or diplomatic incidents. They simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only memories of anger, melted down into revenge. The last Xylar was discovered at a mining station in neutral territory, when she was still a youngster, when the war began. She had never held a weapon in her hands, and the human operative who found her hesitated, looking at this child, the last of her kind. The recruits leaned forward, hoping for mercy. The operative opened her communicator and talked to someone on the ground, then apologized to the child, sincerely apologized, and completed her mission. For 40,000 human children on Elysium had no chance to grow up. The war was a warning. When it ended, the humans did something even more terrible than murder. They erased all traces of the Xylar, their art, their history, and their achievements from galactic records. Their name was removed from the star charts. Their existence was erased from reality, as if they had never existed. The young recruit found his voice. But you remember them. Tavar's scales trembled. Those of us who survived remember. We remember because people want us to remember. They left survivors among other species, living reminders of what happens when humanity stops talking and starts acting. That was the last kind that made people angry, and that's why we're not talking about them. People returned to their colonies, rebuilt, and smiled again at diplomatic meetings. They never mentioned what they had done, never threatened, never bragged. When new species join the galaxy, they meet these friendly, helpful humans and wonder why everyone else seems so evil. We were still fighting for our lives, for our children, for our future. We enjoyed our lives, appreciated every moment, and created our own little worlds. And all the other creatures hoped that we would continue to be happy, because the alternative was a terrifying prospect that we did not want to contemplate.